welcome to another episode of the Blueprint Roundtable. Today, I'm your host, Chrissy Manzano, and I have with me Chuck Brotman and Matt Loers. And today we're going to be talking about something really relevant, as always, but even more intensely, around how go-to-market hiring has been changing. So Chuck, you want to kick us off with your point of view?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously there are always changes in the way that companies are thinking about hiring for talking about go-to-market sales, marketing, and customer success roles. Over the last few months, I think we've all seen two big changes in hiring across go-to-market. Those factors being, number one, the change in the economy and the growing specter of inflation leading to higher interest rates, which have changed the present value of money in a fashion that is causing companies to be more cautious about growth, more cautious about operating expenses in general. And so we've had this, leading to layoffs across, the tech hiring landscape, or the tech company landscape, I should say. We're, on top of this, we're now seeing, a lot of interest and innovation in the world of AI. And I think at some levels, AI itself, both the actual, changes, coming through AI, and also a lot of, sort of interest in companies and how they can use AI perhaps as an alternative to, human beings to do traditional work that they've done, have kind of added to the way that GTM hiring is changing. So when you look at AI trends, when you look at the economic landscape, I think in general, we're seeing companies hire more slowly. There's more focus on ensuring that each hire is made right. I think we're also seeing companies move away from the sort of growth at all costs notion of hiring classes and lots of people, even implicitly hiring multiple people, sort of recognizing that like it could create some competitive pressures and bring out the best from everyone and perhaps yield some redundancy. So if certain people are not executing well, they can be let go. Even that has changed now, and companies are really kind of hiring more on a one at a time basis for very well defined recs across sales, marketing, and CS. So that's what I feel like I'm seeing. Matt, I'm curious for your point of view on this.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think where it really kind of impacts, where the rubber meets the road for us and for candidates right now is a couple different areas. One, I do think that hiring managers are looking for the top end of profiles. So if a job description, for example, says 5 to 8 years, they're really looking for closer to 8. And the nice to haves have bled into the must haves because there is this feeling of a plethora of talent being available due to quite a few layoffs. So I think it's getting a little bit tougher for candidates that meet 90% of the requirements but don't quite meet 100% of requirements, which may not be a bad thing longer term, right? But it is a pretty big shift, and I'm hearing that fairly consistently from candidates in and outside of our network. The other thing that I'm noticing, and this is probably based on our subset of clients and our ICP, but it seems like there's a big push to not necessarily return to office as much as individuals are looking for clusters of employees, whether it's New York City or LA or San Francisco or Chicago, for example. Even if they don't have an office, they want to hire individuals there so that there is almost like a micro dynamic within the organization, especially go-to-market motions where you've got CSMs and AEs all in the same city. And that way it's much more cost effective to do weekly or bi-weekly meetups in an organization. So that's a trend that I'm trying to keep my eye on because it comes up a lot when I speak with candidates that don't live in some of these major metros, whereas before they may have been a great fit for quite a few roles. I think their pool may be shrinking based on companies not fully gravitating away from remote, but moving away from fully dispersed and now focusing in very strategic key areas based on whatever they need at that point in time.
Yeah, I think it's a good call out. I actually think that, Chris, I'll turn over to you after this, but I think that one of the things that I've seen that's been actually kind of healthy and constructive in hiring is that companies are being pretty thoughtful about where they want to locate their GTM hires and why. We're not seeing that many companies ask people to be in the office every day of the week, sort of 9 to 5. I think a lot of those concepts have faded. I think a lot of hiring managers recognize and respect and appreciate for themselves the value of, flexible work arrangements, but people have, philosophies on where they want talent. More often than not these days, there can be a location or office component to it. And in this context where hiring is being done more judiciously, often more slowly, sometimes too slowly, sometimes responsibly. So location is taking on more of a factor, and I think it's something that talent should be mindful of, right? Chrissy, what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah. Well, I agree with everything you all said, but and I also think what I feel that we're seeing, having been in, we've been on the hiring side, of course, so we understand, during all the years that hiring was, happening with startups, those trends. But then on the recruiting side, we were a part of it when it collapsed, then went nuts, and then started collapsing a little bit, right? Or restructuring itself. And one of the changes is people, several, wanting very senior enterprise type folks on the go-to-markets, right? Versus, wanting an SDR or a class of SDRs, right? So I think those are things that we're seeing from a change perspective, and people wanting them to be very specialized. I see a big push in a lot of companies trying to, really kind of either cross the line or dance on the line of you've got to have industry experience. And so where that was kind of being pushed away. So I see some of that coming back a little bit, but I'm curious in hearing everything you all were saying, are these types of changes or that we're all seeing, do you think that they're relatively good and will be impactful over time? Or is this just another reactive emotional situation where because the market changed, companies are, making decisions and plans that are around fear versus actual reality and data and what's needed to drive outcomes?
I think it's a mix of all of that and depends, company by company. I mean, certainly it's hard to fault organizations for, pumping the brakes a bit on hiring in a context where there's more uncertainty about their ability to, if they're a VC-backed company, their ability to raise more capital. Of course, these companies need to watch their burn rate and focus on growing more responsibly and minimizing burn so they can sustain themselves, right? So I think a lot of that is understandable. And to your point, I feel like we have seen some changes here in general, right? That the companies that are doing things well are putting together plans, moving forward on the key hires they need and being thoughtful about what they're looking for without over-indexing on pedigree or background in a way that, or what I've called proof of interest hiring, where they get too focused on those who can flatter the hiring managers and get to the front of the line, right? The best companies are just really looking for what are the skills and behaviors that are needed, what does success look like, and moving forward expeditiously on those hires. But to your point, there are many organizations that are getting more indecisive, right? Shifting gears constantly on hiring based on the last conversation they had, and letting fear drive things, and that's never a good thing, right? And that's the kind of thing that not only impacts your hiring but can also impact your existing team when they see you operating that way. Lures?
Yeah, I think from a candidate's perspective too on this, I think it's probably for the better, at least for the near term, in the sense of there is some hesitancy for some candidates to move now because first in, first out, right? If something goes wrong. So I think between that and the high number of job moves or jumps, even micro promotions that people were experiencing the last 3 years post-COVID, it used to be acceptable.
Right.
If somebody's jumped jobs twice in the last year, well, let's just blame it to layoffs or let's blame it to a COVID impact a year ago. And now it's, it's a layoff. At least from the hiring managers that I talked to, the appearance for me, at least, or the takeaway is some of that hoppiness is now, is disqualifying candidates before they even get a conversation. I want somebody that's been in an enterprise role at the same org for 2 years, or I want somebody who's had 4+ years of enterprise experience where, if you go dig around out there, there's a lot of individuals that in 2019 or 2020 were just out of college in an SDR. Now they've got enterprise sales on their LinkedIn, and that enterprise can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different companies based on stage and size and growth. But at the end of the day, those same candidates now probably aren't going to be looked at as heavily as they would have like a year ago. And I think candidates being a little bit more cognizant of time and seat will probably benefit them later on, because if you've jumped 3 times in the last year and a half to 3 years even, that's going to start looking bad, especially 4 to 5 years from now, maybe.
Right.
When people kind of forget about the COVID hiccup and the wild run that there was for about a year and a half, it's not going to be as favorable, probably. So,
yeah, I mean, perhaps a topic for another roundtable, Chrissy, in terms of the discussion of hoppiness. One thing that's interesting, I was thinking about when you were going through that, is how often. I mean, there's a lot of people like to suggest that job seekers today are not looking for long term, that hoppiness is the new normal, and that job seekers are treating new roles almost as if they're freelancers, right? So they'll sort of take on the work along with their side hustles as long as it's convenient. I've been surprised at how often job seekers continue to tell me that stability is number one in their list in terms of their next new role. I often have talked about how it's a mistake to equate stability with large company, because many large companies have been the least stable places for hires to be, given the layoffs we've seen across big co, but they've also impacted small co. And I think that the fact that so much talent is craving stability, going back, Christy, to your question, I think it's a mistake to assume that everybody is just in job hopper mode, right? A lot of people, are anxious and uncertain about the future, about the economy, about trends in AI that might take away jobs. And so to the extent that companies can really be thoughtful about their plans, what success will look like, what their burn rates and run rate look like, not to make people complacent, but to really give them a sense that any hiring that they're doing, right, it's very thoughtful, and that it's with a midterm, long-term orientation. It's what talent's looking for.